So I know we've normally started with a different kind of PowerPoint, kind of broad than narrow. We're not doing that today, and we normally avoid talking about issues around the globe. But I had to bring one to you this morning that was probably one of the more shocking. I don't know, like there's certain things that you just kind of you don't expect because you think the trend just keeps getting more and more negative. But I wanted to bring you, instead of us doing the grand unified theory of the opposition and understanding people that oppose us, instead of doing that replacing our stories from around the globe, I just wanted to bring you one that I thought was really, really interesting, coming out of the dying headquarters of the European Union. So this past week, the European Union, the female head of, I can't remember what's her name here, Eliana Dali, is it Dali? Yes, sent a 30-page brief out about how reminding Europeans to not use specifically Christian Christmas terms during the Christmas season, and it was really specific. Like even maybe if you're referring to Mary, you don't say Maria. You say something a little bit more diverse, like I'll make sure I get the document right. Which, Maria is common amongst Latinos and Italians as a baby name. You choose Malika or something. So something, if you would just, maybe say Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas. So there is a 30-page document enumerating ways people can be not so Christian. Now, why is this? What's shocking about that? That happens in our country all the time. That's kind of what's shocking was it issued probably the most thunderous response from Pope Francis, of all people. A guy who's a stiff wind would knock him over theologically. I could not. I mean, I'm just shocked. He did. I think it was Thursday. He does basically a PR event right at the Vatican, because the Italians in the area were like, "You got to be kidding me!" I mean, the Roman Catholics are prone to deifying Maria, right? And they're like, "Are you kidding?" So the Pope thunders this. This is, I'll give you a couple of quotes. December 6th, Papal Conference called the Document Guidelines an anachronism of history. What does that mean? It means it's an aberrant thing in history. You're trying to pull some illegitimate history up to us and act like Christianity and Christmas don't belong together. You're providing a watered down secularism that's unacceptable. This is Pope Francis. It's a form of ideological colonization. This type of language policing was something many dictatorships have attempted throughout history. And then he said, like the Nazis and the communists in the 20th century. So this is a pope that I think is one of the most compromised, worst popes since the ones were running around with prostitutes in the Vatican back in the 15th and 16th century. And he gets really upset over this document policing language around Christmas that was sent out to everybody. And again, it's interesting too. The good part. Here's a second shocker. The EU head of diversity, Eliana Dali, rescinded it. Said, well, it's just a rough draft. So only the Belgians, in Belgium is where the headquarters are, the Belgian people were okay with it, but the Italians, the Spanish, even the French, even Macron, the president, I wish Alex was here, former Frenchman, still a Frenchman, Joe, vive la France, it's Mikey, right? Baguette, I should say. Chris sort of is as a Canadian. Anyway, he loves it when I make that connection. Don't you? I hate you. Anyway, no, but Macron, I think I've got the quote. Macron, said this is woke nonsense. I'm like, Macron in France? So I was both shocked that the Pope got a backbone over this subject, and then the other countries, their presidents politically got involved in this, and then they rescinded it. I'm like, man, I mean, I don't know about you, but all of those things are rather shocking on a number of levels. So I thought I had to bring that to you guys this morning and go, I don't know what's going on, but this is quite interesting. So anyway, who'd have thought? I just thought there was absolutely no backbone. I thought there was just jelly inside of Francis. I've been very vocal in my disdain for him, even amongst my Catholic friends and family members. But I could not believe I think within 2 days of the document, he holds an emergency press conference. Now again, one of the issues was Maria, and again, the Mary idolatry worship can kind of become part of that expression, sometimes an illegitimate part of that expression, but nonetheless, but I just was shocked. I could not believe got rescinded, that politicos were engaging in this sort of thing, especially in extraordinarily compromised countries, and then they rescinded it. I just, all of those things, I'm like, huh. So very, very, very interesting. So yeah, anyway, just one of those things I thought I had to bring to you this morning and talk to you. Okay, second thing. There is some content this morning that I want to express to you that is not comfortable. In fact, this is one of the reasons I really breathed a sigh of relief that I could stop teaching this at college and high school levels. I told you, research to do what I feel is an authentic presentation or a research-based presentation on this sort of thing, both scripturally and socially and even scientifically, what we're looking at today, can plunder the soul. And I can remember one particular moment of having to read these books and books and books on this subject of being really, I think I've told you guys about this, being really put off by the idea that this isn't some fringe person, but a professor at a prestigious school was trying to justify pedophilia. I'm like, this isn't some fringe person. This is a person saying this is a part of the. Well, I'm going to give you some quotes on that because that is the inevitable. Well, it's one of the places you go when you start thinking this way. You eventually go toward this sort of thing. Again, I'm not trying to gross anybody out, but you need to hear, I think, these things to know that this isn't just a conservative Christian talking point when you talk to somebody about this sort of thing. We're going to go over certain arguments. That's what we're in right now, is going over certain arguments that can keep the conversation going. I'm going to phrase the end of each one. There's 6 of them, where if somebody just discounts the biblical injunction or negativity on these sort of non-biblical ways of pairing up sexually, where you could keep the conversation going even if they disavowed the Bible. So one of the things we did last week was we looked at a massive amount, because this is one of the main issues, the massive amount of data about how there hasn't been, the biological component has not been scientifically verified. The science just isn't there. Now, I've also told you that just like Jesus, the best way to talk to somebody about these things is not to beat them over the head with it, but to ask questions. One of the 2 basic questions that are easy to remember in the book Tactics by Greg Kugel, who spent 20 years interacting with pedestrian kind of run-of-the-mill skeptics and even high-end skeptics, was to say, why do you believe that, right? And what reason do you have for believing that? Those are 2 easy questions to ask where you can listen and somebody can say out loud what they believe. Well, we're going to end the first of our 6 ways of discussing why we think the biblical injunction against same-sex union is justified, and we don't think that the biological argument or the inborn argument or what's called the constitutional or essentialist argument holds water. We said last week there's just no gene or genes that have been identified that underwrite this sort of thing. So the questions you could ask for this is, 1, do you know the research efforts to prove that same-sex attraction that same-sex attraction is biological? Those have all failed. That's something you could use in a question format and say, I don't know if you knew this, but it's been about a 25-year history of failure to try to underwrite this biologically. Another question you could ask is, after much searching and millions of research dollars spent, are you aware that no gay gene or genes have been found? Now, that's interesting because the cultural ethos, sort of the undefended, unevidenced assumption is that, of course, it's biological. Who would choose to be this way, right? So these are questions with regard to our first of our 6 kind of pushbacks, even if you don't take the Bible seriously, against normalizing the idea that homosexuality is inborn. All right, so the second one's a little bit more complex, but it's called, the technical term for it is a reductio ad absurdum. That means, it technically means reduced to absurdity, but really it's just this. It's a type of argumentation where you say, hypothetically for the sake of argument, let me assume your position's true and show you maybe you haven't thought through it. Again, skeptics do this with us all the time. Oh, so you think the Bible's great? Yes. Well, let me assume the Bible's great, and why don't you follow this? Inconsistency argument, right? So they're assuming something that we're assuming in order to show us they haven't thought through those sort of things. And we handled that consistency objection with regard to this subject a little bit earlier. And in the past in this class, we've handled that sort of subject when it comes to contradictions or difficult passages in the Bible. But number 2 is this, and this is how I think the way I want to state it is this way, and we'll stay here for a little while. but it's here. Even if we grant the possible future discovery of a particular gay gene, just because an act is morally desirable does not make it permissible. So let's take the best case scenario for the person arguing that same-sex attraction is inborn, biologically immutable. It's somehow hardwired into your physiology. This argument is saying, okay, let's assume that. Does that necessarily mean that everybody should get on board and say homosexuality is great? It's just another expression. I'm arguing no, but what you're doing is trying to give your opponent the benefit of the doubt by saying, let me assume that happens. Let's say tomorrow we see newspaper headlines, gay gene found, right? Or gay brain structure found. Or, do you understand what I'm saying? So what if that's the case? Well, the first way of talking about this is this, that the word we use for civilization is doing what doesn't come naturally. Have you ever thought about that? In other words, just because something has a biological component doesn't mean you should follow it unquestioningly, okay? So to give you an example, one I used to do in my classes, imagine you're really, really hungry and you go to Publix. I mean, you're really hungry. You have a biologically based desire, and it's a strong one. Does that mean you go to the bakery, smash through the window, and grab a donut? No, right? Even though you say, you don't understand, I was famished. I had this strong biological desire. No. We still ask the moral question, right? Even if you have a biological reason for what you did, we don't say, hey, okay, you know what? That's okay. How about another one? Get a little closer to home. Husband and wife are arguing. Husband's twice the size of the wife. He'd like to smack her. Now, he doesn't, right? But he could say, hey, it came pretty natural. I mean, I have people get in my face all the time. Listen, civilization is doing what doesn't come naturally. Right? And this, by the way, follows a biblical, even though we're not using the Bible in this section, we're going to reference the Bible. We're not using it as a justification because we're assuming that people think the Bible's garbage in our conversations with them. But the Bible underwrites this idea, too, that, just because you have a fallen proclivity or a habit doesn't automatically justify it, not by a long shot. Principled self-restraint is what we call civilization. Self-restraint, right? And I don't know if you know this. If you wanted to use maybe the most crude summary of civilization, it's this. How far does your freedom go before it violates someone else's freedom? Law and freedom is always this back and forth, right? Always. So the idea here is there are a lot of things you restrain doing that you could make a biological case for, okay? So the first part of number 2, the first part of the response is this. Well, isn't civilization doing just what doesn't come naturally a lot? Even if tomorrow, gay gene found, does that necessarily mean we should just say, hey, go for it? Not necessarily. We still ask the moral question, even if there's a biological component. You see the point? So all moral rules function at a level that don't just get washed away if you baptize them in the gene pool. What does that mean? You don't just say it's moral automatically simply because what? It has some biological component or biological underwriting, okay? Second, let's look at Galatians 5:16 through 19 real quick. Look at Paul here. Listen to the quote. Here we go. So I say, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. For the sinful nature desires what's contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the sinful nature. They are in conflict with each other, so that you do not do what you want. But if you're led by the Spirit, you're not under the law. Now, of course, don't go, you told us no scripture. I'm just saying this response actually matches a biblical idea as well, okay? So even though we're not using the Bible to justify this response, if we'd have paid attention to the Bible, we would have had something like this response as well, okay? So we see Paul making this claim as well, that just because you have a strong desire or habit to do something doesn't make it okay. In fact, you should expect there to be desires that are counter to what God's called you to. Another way to put this is the second part of this critique is that inborn doesn't necessarily mean normal. Inborn doesn't necessarily mean normal. So it doesn't mean morally acceptable. So let me give you an example. When someone's born with something that's not the norm, we either say it's what? Benign, not harmless, or malignant. So the next question to ask is, even if homosexuality is inborn, is it a mutation that should be corrected or something benign? In other words, the assumption is if gay gene found tomorrow happens, it's just like hair color, height, and eye color. We shouldn't adjust it. But why wouldn't we think it's more like crack baby, alcoholism, myopia, or heart murmur? Those are also inborn natural things that people are born with, not the population in general, but a segment of the population. But what do we do with those second ones? We adjust them. Now, I know homosexuals, at least formerly in my life, that I used to have consistent dialogue with, that would say, oh, I don't want somebody. I mean, you think about a future like this. They find a gay gene tomorrow. 2 years down the line, they have a detector, right? And do you want it fixed? So here's the thing. Here's the thing, though. You don't just say it's inborn, therefore great, right? In fact, one of the things you're going to find is that when we admit there's a mild genetic or biological component, I treat the homosexual desire more like an addiction to a drug, not an addiction. And that's why it feels so out of control. But we have all sorts of defects and handicaps that we try to correct. We don't go, well, they're natural, right? We do an advanced detox on a crack baby. We don't say, well, they were born that way. We didn't get Lady Gaga to sing the song, right? And they just continue, do crack. When somebody's born with a strong genetic proclivity, though not determinative, a strong genetic orientation to alcoholism, we don't say, well, drink it up. You're born this way. So the second part of this critique is this. Even if there's a gay gene found tomorrow, you still have to ask the moral question and the health question. And there is no question it's an unhealthy lifestyle. There's absolutely no question. From penalties in your body to even from an evolutionary standpoint. Since you functionally can't procreate anymore. Well, if not functionally, but you're oriented to not procreating anymore. You've destroyed even the Darwinian purpose of existence. So the question, even after it's inborn, is it benign or malignant? Is it something we need to try to change, or is it something that we need to leave alone? In other words, the assumption is if God bless you, if the born gay constituency has scientific underpinning, then automatically it should be treated like hair color, height, and eye color, that we don't adjust, right? But that's not the automatic thing. We don't do that with any other thing that you're born with that might lead to unhealthy, even antisocial outcomes, right? Whether it's myopia, right? We adjust it with glasses, a heart murmur, a crack baby, or alcohol. Are you saying all homosexuals are crack babies and alcohol? Please don't get lost in the analogy. No, I'm saying that the same principle applies, that we don't automatically jump to it being justified like height, hair color, and eye color that you shouldn't touch. In fact, we should ask the next question even if they're born with it, is something that we would want to adjust based on health, right? So something to remember there in the second part of number 2. So again, we don't call something normal if it's even really, really difficult to resist. Like, we don't just give up on people that have a strong desire based somehow in their biology for certain substances. So we don't leave them alone. We think that's uncaring to leave somebody alone like that. Last, the key question, is this inborn thing, right, considered benign, like height or hair color, or is it something, right, defective that we need to try to adjust? So the second part of the critique is, even if a gay gene's found tomorrow, it doesn't necessarily mean that, one, it's something natural and we should all celebrate it, and two, it doesn't certainly mean that it automatically is morally justified in some way, that it should be a sort of a feature of our civilization, like we do when we accept people with different heights, different hair colors, and different eye colors. So that's the key question here. I'm going to give you the questions to continue conversation here in a moment, but let me just do one more slide and I'll see what you think about this. Interestingly enough, they've found some sort of genetic, not marker, but a certain gene expression in all sorts of activities now. At least they say that they don't make you do it, but there might be something in the biology that does this sort of thing. I'll give you some examples. This is, again, part of that reading I had to do. Obesity gene, apparently discovered in April 2006, a ruthless gene discovered in April 2008, a violence gene discovered in July 2008, a male infidelity gene discovered in September 2008, a rape gene discovered in June 2009, a liberal Democrat gene discovered in 2010. I've got all the footnotes for this, but here's the thing. At no point do any of these researchers, and again, remember this is post 2003-4, where all the serious research had failed, but none of them would say this makes them that way, and they're also not going to go a step further and say, yeah, if you got to rape, if you got to, again, they don't go there, but if you got to, just show no discipline with regard to what you eat, then go for it. You know what I'm saying? So So the last one is this. They found some sort of genetic connections between things, but it's never determinative. Dean Hamer is who put that out in the early 90s. It further discredited him after he was one of the serious genetic researchers, worked on cancer genetic research, did gay gene research, backed off of all of it when it couldn't be replicated. And then his next book was The God Gene, that we have proclivities. It doesn't make us. We're not programmed to come to church, but we have proclivities to maybe accept the God idea. Now, again, there's other types of research, solid research, that supported the idea that humans naturally have a God detection device. I don't know if you know this, they call this a hyper agency detection device, HADD. Everybody does acronyms these days. But that falls short of saying, well, our biology makes us more religiously oriented. So I don't buy any of these studies, honestly. Whatever the biological component, it could just be correlation. It's certainly, they would say it doesn't make someone do it. Correlation, something standing alongside something, doesn't mean causation. That's something that stood alongside caused the other thing to happen. Okay, that's a basic thing you don't want to miss. Okay. So the two summary questions that I think for this section that maybe you could use in a conversation would be, even if they found a gay gene at some point in the future, don't you think that the key issue is whether that produces benign or malignant results? So even if they found a gay gene or some sort of biological underpinning in the future, isn't the key question whether that's something we should try to change or something we should leave alone? Another question you could put is, even if some strong inborn component was revealed in the future, hypothetical research, does inborn automatically mean morally acceptable or normal? Of course it doesn't. You can give example after example about how something, you having a strong desire, or even a biological desire for something, doesn't automatically make it moral. Doesn't automatically make it moral. So I'm going to stop here after number 2 and say, first, does everybody get it? First, we talked about it being a type of argument where you assume your opponent's point of view and try to show them they haven't thought it through. 2, I think it's particularly powerful because it assumes the very thing they're desiring to find, a strong scientific inborn argument for homosexuality. And that means you can't say, don't change it. It's immutable, can't be changed. There's no amount of prayer and counsel that can ever change it, because it's just as unchangeable as your height, hair color, or eye color. And this argument says, okay, what if that happens? Is it still a slam dunk that you should do it, that society should endorse it and celebrate it? The answer is still no. One of the best kept social secrets is there are millions of people that have left the lifestyle over the last 40, 50 years. We'll get into when the APA in the early 70s took it out of the diagnostic manual of psychopathologies. When they took it out of there, it was because of social pressure. In fact, a lot of people left their APA, American Psychological Association, credentials there at that secular event in San Francisco simply because they had aided homosexuals in leaving that lifestyle. But the other end of the spectrum is like one of the first big interviews with Ellen when she really blew up, from being a stand-up comic to being out on her show Ellen as a gay comic and celebrity. Diane Sawyer was interviewing her, and she goes, well, what do you think about people that say this is an immoral lifestyle? She goes, well, I've always felt this way. Right, so she's an inborn proponent of I've always felt this way since I was the idea is I was very little, so I've always felt this way, and we are Diane just kind of shook her head and said yes. Now, again, I think the TV would have exploded if Diane Sawyer said, well, a lot of people that think your lifestyle is immoral have felt that way since they were very little. Does that mean they're right too? Or now, this is hardly a way to justify, this thing that, and so I mean, the TV would have exploded with that kind of interaction, but instead it was just, that's right. So this is, the question from Juke was something like this. Doesn't one authentic person that turns, refute the whole inborn argument? I think so, yes, but one of the ways they deploy a defense of that is to say, well, they maybe weren't ever to begin with, which is interestingly close to the whole idea, what Calvinists go when some person like comes, right, leaves the faith. They never were really believers anyway. They, or as they say, they tasted but didn't swallow Jesus, and that kind of, they didn't really ingest it. So you're like, okay, but yeah, so he's right, and there are legions and legions of people that have left the lifestyle, and people that have gone sort of in between, been bisexual and then come out. So it's there again, millions and millions. In fact, when Exodus International used to be a viable ministry to help homosexuals before, basically public scrutiny caused them to shutter their doors, I believe in 2010 or earlier. They, on their site, they had millions of testimonies of people that have been out at least 3 years, left the lifestyle. if this argument's right, you've never really left it, right? You always, you always have the desire, and it'll never go away. And sometimes there's rhetoric deployed to do this as well. They don't usually people don't approach you and say, I'm a constitutional essentialist when it comes to homosexuality. They say things like, you can't pray the gay away. There's no choice involved. Don't you know, idiot? It's part of who I am. So that's kind of how these things go. Any other question or comment about what we're looking at, or the second argument? Because it really does, even if, like I said, even if tomorrow, open the newspaper, there's some sort of article where they say, well, we found it, here it is. I still don't know if it's a slam dunk. In fact, I'm quite sure it's not a slam dunk to be something celebrated and underwritten socially, or at least non-stigmatized. Yeah. Yes, where there's some sort of major relational either dysfunction or break, and then all of a sudden somebody says, well, I was this way, or where someone has left a family and done this sort of thing. This happens with some male fathers and husbands as well. I don't know that again. There's not a lot of back and forth because there's no good answer from the community on this. They just say, well, they're faking it. I'll just go for Ellen again. So Ellen had a romantic relationship with another woman early on in her career named Anne Hesh. I don't know if you remember. She did probably her most prominent movie as an actress was 6 Days, 7 Nights, or 5 Days, 6 Nights. It was so boring. It'd wake me up on the fifth night. It was with Harrison Ford. Right after that movie with Harrison Ford, she broke it off with Ellen and then got with a male and has 2 kids and said, I wasn't gay. Ellen has a standing rule when interviewing her that you cannot ask about Anne Hesh. Why? Because she has to say one of 2 things. Either our relationship was a total fraud and she never really was gay and acted like it, and I don't want to say that because she broke up with me and broke my heart, or her new relationship's fake because she's really still gay biologically with her new husband and her kids. So don't ever ask me about Anne Hesh. You can't ask her about that. In fact, she doesn't even want you asking her about her former person, whether Portia Del Rosa, I think, from Arrested Development. I'm trying to remember the actress from Arrested Development was, I think, her last person that she was with. Same thing with Rosie O'Donnell. Don't ask her. She says don't ask her about personal lives, but it's basically, since they're both committed to the biological argument, any former lover that's left the lifestyle has to be either their relationship was inauthentic or their new relationship's inauthentic, and they don't want to say that, so they just say don't discuss it. But that's a good question, Elizabeth, a really good one. I don't know. I mean, there's not a lot of solid research with regard to answering that sort of thing. They would just say, well, maybe they aren't really, or they're wanting attention. There's all sorts of things that could happen. All right. So, third argument is an argument that says it's hard to understand how you, in principle, could hold back any sexual variation being justified with this. This was one of the original arguments the religious right or the moral right made when homosexuality was starting to become mainstreamed in the late 80s and early 90s. They said, well, what's to stop you continuing to go and just justify anything? You remember my discussion I had with the sociologist at I won't say the university. Maybe I've said it before. We'll edit it out. Who said, I know I'm supposed to teach sociology. I really just want to get rid of the concept of sexual perversion. I want to get rid of that because that makes people feel bad. So, and you Christians are repressive. So the third argument is this. It seems difficult to ever tell anyone they have a wrong sexual desire if you're going to say this is A-okay and it's somehow biological. What's to stop somebody from in the future saying I'm biologically attracted to my own siblings? Right? Or cadavers. There are people that there are cadavers. That's disgusting, but the point is, who's to say, right? Right? You combine the moral relativism of the secular, modern secular progressive with this way of thinking. Can you really make a case? This is where, like I said, I'm going to have to give you you're going to join me in the uncomfortable stuff. So listen to this. This past Wednesday, New York Post reported, quote, a Virginia university has placed an assistant professor on administrative leave after the educator sparked a heated backlash, thank God, for saying it isn't necessarily immoral for adults to be sexually attracted to children. The professor in question, a female-to-male transgender named Alan, A-L-L-Y-N Walker, who identifies as non-binary, had suggested that we refer to people with pedophilic attraction. First said pedophilia's got so much baggage with it. They suggested intergenerational intimacy and minor attracted persons. They call them MAPs now, MAPs. Walker did say child sex abuse was never, ever okay, explaining, I want to be clear, child sexual abuse is an inexcusable crime. As an assistant professor of sociology and criminal justice, the goal of my research is to prevent crime. But had suggested we refer to, again, people with pedophilic attraction as minor attracted persons or MAPs, thereby, his words, lessening the stigma. So this comes from a long line of people that have said this sort of thing. So this is Walker again. From my perspective, there's no morality or immorality attached to attraction because no one can control who they're attracted to because it's in their biology. In other words, it's not who we're attracted to that's either okay or not okay. It's our behaviors in responding to that attraction that are either okay or not okay. After all, if sexual desires are innate and immutable, meaning you're born this way and it's impossible to change, how can even pedophilic desires be judged as wrong? This is hardly a new concept. Listen to this. This is a guy, influential professor at Johns Hopkins, John Money, died in 2006. Listen to this. He wrote this in early 2000s. Pedophilia and ephebophilia, referring to sexual attraction felt by an adult towards an adolescent, are no more a matter of voluntary choice than is left-handedness or colorblindness. There is no known method of treatment by which they may effectively and permanently be altered, suppressed, or replaced. Punishment's useless. There's no satisfactory hypothesis, evolutionary or otherwise, as to why they exist in nature's overall scheme of things. One must simply accept the fact they do exist and then with optimum enlightenment formulate a policy about what to do about it. Now, I'm going to respectfully disagree with John Money. I can say even in my avocation type research, there are plenty of people that have resisted and put that desire out to pasture, both gay as well as pedophilic desires. That's not true that there's been no evidence of change. It's simply not true. But let me give you another. Dr. Theo Stanford. Again, notice these aren't just bloggers, okay? And again, in the late 80s, this is what was said to be coming. And they said, oh, look at you. You know what? The sky is falling, Chicken Little. No, we just said this is an extension on the argument. If anything goes sexually, then anything goes sexually. And if you read that article I sent you out of Same-Sex Matters, the article by Michael Medved, this was part of the plan to suppress the more socially unacceptable aspects of the movement. So Theo Stanford, this is in an article entitled Constructive Questions Regarding Pedophilia. So we want to ask constructive questions. Stanford is a respected professor where? At Columbia University in New York. If pedophiles are no longer forced to live underground and then be secret about their relationships, but instead their desires are recognized as legitimate and moral, and they are guided towards responsible expression of their desires, we might prevent some cases of sexual abuse. You want to prevent sexual abuse? You let the pedophiles express themselves and pursue things. So neither Walker nor Stanford or John Money think that this line of thinking, the way we're thinking, is positive or helpful. Wouldn't it be better for the struggler to say this is reprehensible and repulsive? I want to do everything I can to get rid of this and have a normative, better sexual desire and sexual attraction. Not when the culture says, no, you can't do anything about it. So, so again, the way you use an acronym is to destigmatize, MAPS, right? Or intergenerational intimacy, because the word pedophile brings so much visceral, rightful moral outrage to it. Yes. So when it comes to pedophilia, the legal question is age of consent. That's the big one. And again, I don't want to. It is a feature of the times we live in that I have to tell you. There is about a 1,700 person constituency for NAMBLA, National Man Boy Love Association, or NAMBLA, National Association of Man Boy Love. Their one desire is to lower age of accountability, 2 out of 8. Right now, the lowest is 15. The lowest is 15. The highest is 17, I think, in states where, they're legally called a minor, and this would be. But that's the one thing, right? That and this has long been documented. That since you can't have kids, you recruit younger, kind of socially awkward boys. So yeah. What Mikey said was, we heard this argument that this was the sky is falling, don't push this, that we said this is going to open up a type of, that's the next argument, Pandora's box. And then Chris followed that up and said, well, any crime. And that leads to our next one. But just know with this one, you can't have a concept called pervert, deviant, You can't even have anything negative because that's repressing their legitimate feelings that are based on their biology. It's like telling someone they couldn't be a certain height. Yes, Paul has a good point. That battle's over. We've certainly lost the rhetorical battle. I think one is you start like, I'm going to use live not by lies here. You start first in your own life being willing to say the truth, even if it costs you. There's a whole lot of Bible on that sometimes you don't just get bad things in your life, because you've somehow not made good decisions in your godly walk, but sometimes you get bad things in your life because you're a Christian. That happens. That is totally biblical. I'm going to prevent myself from preaching on that, but but first you're willing to say and think and bring the truth before you, say it and do that sort of thing, and then I think at this point, legally, I think you just say, okay, well, your community's not going to. I don't have a lot of patience. I've got 4 kids. I'm bringing a blowtorch to a pedophile meeting near my. Not that I'm going to bring a blowtorch, but I'm saying I don't have a lot of the very idea that the old adage, you can always bring a professor in to justify any immorality. You just bring him in and say, well, see, it's psychological, but nature or nurture. Well, no. If you can't call that wrong, we don't have simpatico. I mean, if you're willing to ask, like 1 Peter 3:15, you ask, I'll give a reason for the hope I have within me. But I am not going to. I'm not going to be. I will operate under the laws of the land to say you could do that, but I'm going to protect the people in my area. So I'm sorry. That's a kind of just like over Thanksgiving, my wife and I'll just say it, had a really, really difficult time with a lifelong family member that was an addict that was demanding to stay in the house with my kids, and I'm going. The probability of an explosion where I'm going to have to do something. We've got another spot for you. I don't care how that makes you feel. We got another spot. I can't. You're lucky to be invited at this point. A 56-year-old multiple prison addict, and he was offended, right? And ran the whole. You're a pastor. I can't. Okay. There's a protection that comes about that I think honestly that if you can't protect those you love, I think you've fundamentally missed an issue. Is there a way to do that with trying not to offend? When it comes to this sort of thing, I think just separating. Like I said, if there's somebody that comes over and you feel there's a legitimate move toward repentance and they want to engage the Holy Spirit to fight this, wonderful. But I'm not going to that because they're not asking for a spiritual or even a logical. They're just get out of the way. And you know how this has gone over the years. It went from leave us alone, right, closeted, to we want to be out there and leave us alone, to you're going to celebrate us or we're going to take your business and affect your family. So I'm like, okay, so yeah, I don't know. Good question as far as the practicality. Let's look at some questions with response for response number 3. Are you okay with any sexual expression or variation? Why or why not? Because the next thing would be, because doesn't biology mean you can't have any problem with any sexual variation? There can be no negative sexual variation. Think about this. Does consent even protect you? I'm still attracted and I'm supposed to follow my attractions. I mean, right? We've already seen there's kind of a genetic something to rape, according to some research. Next question. Do you think all sexual expressions have the same basic outcomes? Of course that's not the case, but do you think so? If not, how do you think one avoids negative outcomes if the desire is rooted in our brain or bodies? Okay? Good questions to ask. Remember, questions are the way you keep something going forward. And this leads to number 4, which you've already kind of gotten to. If you're going to say your body determines the actions you do, you've said bye to civilization. Okay? Because here's the thing. Think about the complex behaviors that are required for you to first be visually attracted, then move towards them, date them, and then consummate with a bodily activity sexually. Those are complex human actions with your arms and legs and body, face, eyes, those sort of things. If you're saying all of those are rooted in an unavoidable, unchangeable biology, there are far less complex things. Is being desirous, going on a date, and consummating that date more complex or less than doing this with a knife to someone? In other words, if you're saying, I am at the behest of my genes, my body makes me do it, you no longer have civilization anymore. It's called the Pandora's box argument. So does this gene work? And I'll tell you, I've never met a homosexual that went this way. That they would say it, but they hadn't thought it through. So this is the fourth argument, right? So if we're saying these drives give result to complex human behaviors, can I say something like this? Your Honor, I come from a long line of thieves. My grandpa's a thief. My great-grandpa's a thief. I've always felt like it was hard to keep my promises. So I really shouldn't be. The first one to try a genetic move in the court of law was actually a guy named Darrow, who was in the famous Scopes trial. He was defending some youths that had decided to beat to death a mentally retarded person. They'd beat him to death with, and so this is pre-insanity plea. So he said, well, their families are, some of them have an ethnic background of violence. So the judge rightly said at that point, this is back, I believe, in the 40s. The judge said, "You've just undermined the entire legal system." No, of course I'm not giving this. I know you're desperate because this looks bad. There are eyewitnesses. There's fingerprints. You did this. This looks especially heinous. So pre-insanity plea went, well, it's in their genes. It's genetic. He also tried to use an evolutionary argument. Well, if we're just evolved slime and monkeys, it's just, your genes made you do it. Maybe we had violent animal ancestors. I'll give you another example. Some years ago, a friend of mine was talking to a woman. He had worked at a church. He wasn't a minister. He was a bivocational individual. And he was talking to a woman who got really mad, just saw a Bible on him and got really upset and kept shouting at him, "There's no choice, there's no choice, there's no choice." And he said, well, let me ask you this. What if I called you a bull dyke lesbian and I can't stand the sight of you? And she goes, I knew it. I knew you were a secret bigot. He goes, but maybe I got a bigot gene. Maybe I come from a long line of bigots. Maybe I have, seriously, saying these words is less complex than attraction, dating, and consummation of a sexual act. Maybe I want to say I love you and I be kind to you, but what comes out is bull dyke. The woman, listen, to her credit, she went completely silent. She's like, okay. Do you understand what I'm saying? She went, wait a second. If I'm going to run with this, right, then it lets in anything. I guess I'm genetically determined to be intolerant. Do you understand what I'm saying? You've gotten rid of counsel, teaching, change, law. You're going to lock somebody up for their height or hair color? Some of these activities, I robbed the bank. Well, I come from a long line of bank robbers. Well, are they there? Well, they had the desire. They just didn't follow through on it. Oh, they haven't identified a robbing gene. They will. Do you see what I'm talking about? It's a recipe for anarchy. It's a recipe for anarchy. So another thing to think through is how hard are you going to push this? Genetic determinism undermines civilization. It says there's no will at all. Nothing. Nothing you can do, say, or nothing. Now, not only does that fly in the face of the research and the testimony of millions, it also is something you haven't thought through. Think this thing through. Are you really saying something as complex as attraction, dating, and sexual or romantic consummation is somehow determined by your biology? Are you going to say that for less complex things that are now called illegal? Right? Yeah, I come from a long line of adulterers. Yeah, always. Even when I was little, I had a hard time keeping my promises. It's probably biological. This becomes an excuse to do anything you want, okay? Anything at all. So, again, a way to put this is praise and blame are gone. Accountability, counsel, and responsibility are now useless words if you run with this genetic determinism. If your genes or your biology makes you do complex behaviors, you're now a puppet to some hitherto unidentified gene that makes you do things you really like doing, but that you have no control over at all. So useless words. You have no control. So how can I praise somebody? You got an A on the test, you're probably genetically determined with a good brain. You got an F, there's no sense teaching you because you're probably genetically determined to be an idiot. Right? And by the way, this was something that went along what's called the eugenics movement in the early 20th century. People are biologically have biological overtures. That's how they'd put it. Biological expressions that make them undesirable. So we got to sterilize them.
Right.
So praise and blame are gone, accountability and counsel. Now, again, I want to be clear. In other places in the world, I'd be arrested for even doing this teaching with you guys. I do not want to burn up pedophiles, but I'm just saying my reaction is still visceral to this sort of thing because this, again, a society is judged, even by history, by what they do with their weakest and most vulnerable, the old and the very, very young. And if you're going to say anything goes with this sort of thing or try to justify it, I think we're all in a bad place. Let me give you a couple questions for this number 4, and then we'll be done. There's 3 of them. Genetic determinism is a mouthful, but doesn't it undermine life? Doesn't it undermine life? Now, they might ask, what's genetic determinism? You are determined and can't act in any other way by your biology. Doesn't that undermine everything we take for granted and that we think is good about life? 2, if we are ultimately under the total control of our genes, then nothing really matters, right? Because you can't help it. There's really no will. And so any outcome was determined by your genes anyway. It doesn't even matter how you raise a child, right? Parenting doesn't matter. Teaching doesn't matter. Counsel doesn't matter. All of it doesn't matter if your biology says it's going to be this way. If I spent the rest of my life counseling you on your height, would it change a thing about your height? Right? Now, on the other end of the spectrum, even if there is something malignant about your biology, we still fight, don't we? We don't just say, hey, crack baby, you get it, right? Proclivity to alcoholism, it's natural. We don't do that, right? Last question. Do you agree that everything is compromised if we assign this kind of link between behavior and biology? Now, it's a mouthful. But basically, if you're going to make this strong of a link between behavior and biology, the nature of the nature-nurture argument, don't you think that everything is compromised? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about it? Because what you're proposing is that you are a puppet to really complex behaviors, even less complex, arguably, than robbing a bank, slitting a throat. Are you saying all gays do it? No, don't get lost in the analogy. I'm not saying all gays slit throats or rob banks. I'm saying you allow that Pandora's box to open if you're going to say your biology made you do it. That's just strong thinking, right? Question or comment about number 4, the Pandora's box argument? Yes, go ahead, Mikey. Mikey is making a point about a sociological point. Isn't it true that we have at least some prima facie, on the face of it, evidence historically that people that run this way, it ends up degrading the society rather quickly? Yes and no. And the reason I say, what a great answer. I was talking on both sides of your mouth. The yes is we have some examples of pockets of people that have done this, but the no is they don't really do it. When it comes to real things like going, well, I'm biologically determined to be lazy, so I'm not getting food for my family. There are so many social things pushed on them, they end up going and doing it. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's almost like people that say they're relativists and they don't really live like it. The minute the life's pressed on them, they don't do it. But on the other end of the spectrum, people have said just let go with the sexual stuff. It does tend to be correlated to societal decline. There's a number of, you can look at probably one of the most known works of the Roman Empire is by a guy named Edward Gibbon. And Gibbon, an Irish historian, had a number of factors for the fall of the Roman Empire. Some have been contested, others have been verified. This wasn't just one thing. But there are historians that argue this sort of rampant, it was at least a significant part of the decline of that and the Greek Empire. But of course, you're in a conquest culture, so it's a little hard too. If you have a big guy coming in, right, doing this sort of thing, it makes it hard to make those sort of determinations. But good point, good question. Anybody else on the Pandora's box argument? Do you understand it? I hope it's not too hard to understand. It's linked to number 3. 3 is you can no longer say anything sexual is bad. 4 is you really can't say anything's bad at all or good if your genes made you do it. Great point. Elizabeth's saying you have these sort of unforeseen outcomes, like when we talked about relativism. It was put forward by intelligentsia and the elites to help us not fight with each other, but it leads right to fighting with each other because what happens is whoever has the most resources and the most power decides who's valuable and who's not. That's ethics, right? That's right or wrong, good or evil. It's who you value and who you don't. They end up doing that very thing. A person decides who's valuable and who's not, and it leads to the very thing, the very oppression you're trying to avoid. She's saying, doesn't this happen as well? Like, don't you end up getting the very thing you avoid if you say, well, your genes made you do it, right? Doesn't that lead to, well, if I'm going to have to put you in jail and act like you don't have any free will because why? You're a danger to other people. And we're right back, I'm glad you brought me full circle, back to any civilization vying with freedom to pursue what you want to do. When and where does that freedom violate, right? Go over the line and curtail someone else's freedom to express themselves as well. So we were able to do this interesting balance when we honored a transcendent that we would kind of say, okay, well, we can't go this far to that one, and there was a heavenly sort of thing that came in after us. I think almost even secularists would affirm that sort of thing, that we used to have this transcendent point of reference to say, okay, this is how far my freedom goes. And in fact, I'd be willing to give up these freedoms for other people if it brings them to understand this higher power. That's gone. So this attempt to try to bring a utopia on earth actually ends up doing the opposite. In fact, if you look at the 20th century, a godless ideal with no judgment combined with the utopian vision brought some of the worst bloodshed in human history because of where the technology was at the time. Yeah. Well, if you say who cares, like what a bigot, you're like genetic bigot, really? No, you shouldn't do that. I'm not saying that. I'm not offering that as a procedure, but I'm just saying if you think this is biological, I mean, couldn't we say that about anything? Or at least with number 4. With number 3, you're like, so do you think any sexual variation is wrong? Like, are you cool with incest or necrophilia or bestiality? No. Why? They're differently attracted. We'll use an acronym for them, right? Bestiality attracted people, BAPS. If you want, no, I'm dead serious, and we laugh at it. I mean, look, if that's, I'm gonna have to say, there's a magazine for people attracted to their pets called The Blade. So it's out of Boston. They've got a constituency online and in physical copies. So I'm just saying, I know we laugh at that sort of thing, but we used to go, no way. We used to go, no way, about 25 years ago to this stuff. So I think there's something to, at least now we can see there's something to the accordion, right? First started like gay, lesbian, right? Now it's alphabetized subverters of culture. So anyway, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time together today, Lord. We are trying to think these things through and find ways to tell the truth in love and bring people closer to what you say is how you designed us, without that coming off as arrogant or intolerant, but Lord, but also going, we don't think this is right. We don't think the wink and the nudge at any sin is good, but especially a sin that manifests itself in a habit that justifies it as not sin at all. So would you help us see the difference between things and avoid a fallen, darkened mind and be wise, a mind that can't tell the differences between things, Lord? Would you help us be salt and light, Lord, that we can be okay with persecution, okay with rejection, okay with negativity, but also be both bold and humble at the same time. Only you can give that to us. Help us with this, Heavenly Father. And I thank you for this time in Jesus' name. Amen.